Alrighty, greetings and welcome to the third Winter's Week dev stream. Oh, and we're totally on the wrong slide. Let's fix that. Alright, it's been a while since the last one, so apologies to anybody who's been hanging out. I've wanted to get a few of the core programming things that I've been trapped in the middle of sorted before doing the next one, and we're here now. So today we're going to look at scene design and scene design related stuff. Mostly looking at the things that I have done in the past, scene design wise, and how that's changed over time as the development of the game has progressed. We're going to be looking at sort of the anatomy of a scene, what makes up a scene, and then we're going to go through the steps of kind of designing or roughing out an example scene or two, and see where we go from there. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to ask them in chat. I'll answer them along the way if they're relevant at the time. Otherwise, we'll do a bit of Q&A at the end. So sit tight, this one won't be as long as the first, anticipating sort of half an hour, 40 minutes-ish, unless we go over time, but either way, it's all good, so enjoy! So the first thing we want to touch on is what a scene itself is in Icicle, and for the most part, it's basically a way to group together interactive objects and make them available to the player. That's like from a gameplay perspective, that's really all it's all about. But we do that as a collection of positioned objects and audio. So there's rather than just the interactive objects, we've also got extra stuff to help sort of flesh out the scene. And then the real thing that scenes bring, that as far as the kind of meat of the experience goes, is kind of conveying a sense of presence, and so using the positioning of the objects and their colors, as well as the positioning of the ambient environmental audio, kind of help you feel like you're really in the scene. So this is what a scene looks like, roughly, internally to the engine. It's got a title and a description and a color, which is the background color for the scene, and then it's got a list of objects and audios, and they have their own kind of positioning and rotation information. So the objects are defined in XYZ space, and then have XYZ rotation, whereas the audio is defined as a rotation and then a distance. And that's just because that's the nature of the way that SDL audio, the audio library that I'm using, or SDL mixer, sorry, does that. But yeah, another thing that we do along the way, which I haven't really kind of touched on in the slides at all, is that when we create our scene, we make like a dummy object that represents the scene itself, and that carries across the scene title and the scene description, and makes sure that that gets rendered properly to the player. Yeah, so we'll just do a 360-degree turnaround of the avalanche scene here. We can see that the colors change depending upon what we're looking at. Hopefully the sounds are coming across in stereo, because the sounds change as well. And then we're going to go through and we're going to look at what that actually looks like in terms of the positioning of the 3D elements in the scene. So we have, for anybody who's played the demo, hopefully this scene will be pretty familiar. To the north we've got a tree, and then slightly north east we've got the crossroads. In the southeast we've got an exit that we can use to get to where the lake is. Behind us we have the snow and the mountain. And then in the southwest we've got the mountain face leading off to the west. In the northwest and up we've got the sun, and the ground is like a big circle. So these are like flat plains pretty much. The sun itself is like an icosahedron, but that's not really a big deal. Yeah, so it's like this really kind of simple stuff. We'll take a bit more of a look at it. The other thing we've got, as I said, is the audio, and in this case we've got a couple of bird samples that are spread out, so that when you turn your head, you get a sense of those shifting around. And then we've got the waterfall in the distance, so that if you do travel towards the waterfall, you hear that get louder, and that gives you a sense of moving to another place, and helps convey the distance between those two scenes. So if we jump back and forward, we can see that the waterfall location for the audio is in the same direction as the exit that takes us to the lake. And the bird sounds are just kind of towards the forest and around us. And then if we want to look at what that looks like without the color averaging done, this is the same thing, but a bit of a peek behind the curtain to show what the geometry looks like. We can't quite see the sun, it's above the, a bit further up. But yeah, the tree itself is just a big rectangle. There's nothing special about it there. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the way that I design scenes, how that has changed over time. And there's been kind of like a bunch of like really discrete phases that I've gone through, where I've had different approaches to doing stuff. So back in July 2014, when I first started prototyping the idea of a first-person text adventure type thing, I was using JMonkey Engine at the time. And all the experiments there were done with like programmatically creating cubes and things. And then when I actually started development of the game itself, for 7-day FPS, I was doing kind of more complex stuff. And then we moved on to working on the demo that's out at the moment. And that, excuse me, my approach to doing things changed distinctly between that period based on the testing that I'd done. And then I made a few more changes as I've been working on other projects along the way, so we'll dive in and have a bit of a look at those. So another thing that I was doing back in the very early prototyping was I was doing raycasts against these objects, working out how far away they were, and then using that distance to determine what the description should be like. So if you look at a hill or something, it would say you see a hill in the distance. But if you were close to it, would say, you see the grass leading up the hill or something. So there's like a more detailed description when you were closer. And this is kind of what the code looked like in JMonkey Engine when I was just experimenting around. And that's what the visuals looked like. Not particularly inspiring. And so by the time I'd moved across to working on my own engine for 7-day FPS, I was trying to model like really complex scenes in Blender. If anybody's watched the first Winter's Wake dev stream, there are a few renders of some of the stuff I'd made for that. And what I was doing was I was kind of imagining that if I made these complex shapes, that players, as they explored the scenes, they would learn the shape of those shapes by following the contours or something. And it just turned out that got really confusing. So there was like a crossroads sign, which was like a tall post with like signs sticking out of it at different angles, and people didn't know when they were exiting the sign or entering the sign. Nobody really had a sense of what the shape was. They just found that it was finicky and couldn't quite work out where it existed and where it didn't exist. So this is what a scene looked like in Blender. I mean, when I say complex, it's comparatively complex. It's not particularly it's not that complex, but we can see here this is the avalanche scene again, the same one that we just looked at, but the tree has a decided tree shape. It has a discernible trunk, as just kind of an example. And what I was doing was I was modeling everything up in Blender like this, so I could get a look at the scene, and I could use the in-Blender camera to look around and see what things looked like, and then I would sort of batch export all of those models. And they would all have their origin at the position that the camera was at. So all of everything would be its own separate mesh. And I found that was kind of, particularly when I discovered that I couldn't use the complex meshes, I found that it wasn't very efficient to like re-export everything. So I decided to switch to using simple meshes, which are just rectangles or circles, and reusing those. So now I define XYZ position and rotation for the object file separate from the mesh, and so we can take the same model and move it around to different parts of the scene and reuse it, which is a little bit more efficient as well. So that's pretty cool. And at that point, I also brought in sounds, because sounds weren't really present in the game until then. I always knew it was going to work, but in some respects, it was probably a bit of a gamble. The audio stuff, but yeah, it came out well. And so this is what that same scene kind of looks like, as we saw a bit earlier in that short video. When it came time to do Voices of the Past, which was a game I made for TazJam last year, using the same engine, I added some in-engine tools for tweaking the position and rotation, because previously I was just writing out the X and Y, X, Y, and Z coordinates in a text editor, and I felt that it would be a lot faster if I could just rotate them and move them in the scene. So that definitely helped speed things along. That allowed me to do things like just duplicate the object files, write the descriptions, and then jump into the game and move everything at once, rather than work on each object individually. And we also added background images to some of the elements, particularly the interactive objects in Voices of the Past. So here we can see there's like a dresser that we're looking at or something, and there's this like faint picture of a dresser in the background. And if we pull away the color average thing, that's what the scene ends up looking like. And then sort of moving forward, and some of this is stuff that I've already done, I now define state-specific sounds for objects. So if there's taking the Winter's Wake demo, for example, when the guard is snoring, that's a sound that's defined in the object rather than in the scene. So that when we throw the stone and the object state changes, it knows to stop that sound for us. I want to move towards using generated geometry as well, so that instead of having a model that is a rectangle or a model that is a circle, because that's a fairly simple shapes, I want to be able to have the engine generate those for us, and just use the option to load models to be used for more complex stuff if I ever need it. I want to improve the rotation and position and control stuff, so that I can move that stuff with the mouse the way I would in Blender. I might make an external tool or add some extra features internally. I'm not sure about giving me the ability to create objects at runtime, edit some of the descriptions at runtime if I spot a spelling mistake or something. Maybe browse the properties and tweak things if needed. And I'd also like to look towards creating importer scripts. So again, if you wanted to do the kind of batch mesh export and import process from Blender, I'd like to streamline that, or maybe do an importer for Twine or something like that. So if you kind of think about it, when you're developing I think they're called rooms in Twine. The things that are hyperlinks are objects that you could interact with if you brought them across to this engine, and you'd be able to carry across the descriptions as well. So it could be a kind of neat tool for roughing things out for people who are familiar with that kind of workflow. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. And I also want to go through the process of creating an example scene, and this is the meat of today's stream. Before starting, I think there's a bunch of questions you need to ask, and these are sort of fairly important things. You've got to work out how the scene fits into the world that you've created, and how whether or not it works within the context that you've created in terms of world building. So, for example, again, taking the Winter's Wake demo, for example, we've got the crossroads scene. And to the south you can hear the waterfall, and you can hear a couple of other things, and we try and make it so that it's orally linked to the adjacent scenes, and you have a sense of being able to use the sounds to understand the distance that you've traveled and understand the direction that you've traveled and that sort of stuff. So if you try and keep that in mind when designing a scene, that can really help. It's worth thinking about whether or not the scene itself is actually necessary, because this kind of game is inherently confusing and a little bit disorienting and stuff. I think it's particularly important to make sure that you don't have deadweight scenes slowing players down. So if it provides an interesting experience, like an experience that you think is going to be valuable to the player, then put it in. But if it doesn't do much, if it feels like filler content, then just put exits, jump straight from A to C instead of going through B. A nice example of a scene that doesn't do anything, but was still worth including, would be the waterfall scene in the Winter's Wake demo. That's probably the one that sound-wise I'm most proud of. Because you get there and it feels quite overpowering. It feels how you would expect a kind of waterfall to feel. and you have the opportunity to just kind of look around and then leave when you've had enough. But it really does have that kind of really cool sense of being there. I had a lot of really positive feedback on that one. So you want to kind of also imagine once you've got an idea for a scene. So normally I start with like a map, or at least for Winter's Wake I started with a map, and which is the big, and I haven't included it here, sadly. I should have. But yeah, my big kind of world map, and then kind of working out whereabouts the locations that the puzzles happen are, where the characters are, where the interactive elements, which scenes, which locations they're going to exist in, and from that I derive which scenes are going to exist. And sometimes there are adjoining scenes, sometimes there are not. But when there are, I kind of make sure that they have a solid reason for being there. And so once you've kind of got that short list of scenes, then you can sort of start to ask, well, what objects and sounds make sense in that scene? You know, if you are in a forest, we probably want to have birds, and we probably want to have trees, and you know, and that sort of stuff. Is the sun visible? Do we want to put it up there? Is the sky there? Or is there a tree canopy that we want to describe? Or that sort of thing. The other thing to think about is to make sure that the scene itself isn't too overpopulated, and also isn't too sparse. So typically I've found that about 30 degrees is what you want to, like 30 degrees of horizontal movement is what you want to give each individual object. The most recent game I've made with this engine was done for the Mist Jam earlier this year, and there's a scene which has 10 objects in it, and that feels really crowded. And that does give about 30%, 30 degrees of you know, room to kind of exist within an object when you're panning across it. But it doesn't leave a lot of gap between any of them. So yeah, I would say like try and, like, horizontally speaking, try not to put more than 10 objects in that space, because they're really hard to kind of put in there and expect players to keep track of them all. But similarly, you don't want to have too few, because if it's too empty, it starts to kind of undermine the scene's existence. There's a scene in Voices of the Past, which is like, it's the cafe scene, where it's meant to be that for the character, nothing else is existing except for the person that she's interacting with, and so on all sides is just blackness. And I kind of feel like that's one of the weakest scenes in the game. So certainly a lesson learned there. As I said, it's worth thinking about whether or not you can use sounds from nearby scenes to help give a sense of spatial relationship between the scenes. And then also think about like how you can distribute the objects and the sounds within the scene to help guide players towards understanding where they're facing and when their direction changes. So like a good example is like keep the ground dark and the sky bright, so that when you look down it's always darker, when you look up it's always brighter. Those kinds of cues end up feeling kind of intuitive. But also if you like separate the soundscape spatially, it means that if you've got a sound that is strong off to your right and a sound that is kind of weak in front of you, as you turn you'll hear the sound to your right disappear behind you and the faint sound move to your right, but it will be a little bit less prominent because it's not directly in front of you. And that kind of turning of or movement of the sounds around you like really helps you understand whether you're moving left or right, how quickly you're moving, and how far you've moved when you stop. So there's like really important things to think about. So with all of that in mind, we're going to go through the idea of like a seaside scene with it's going to be two scenes. There's going to be a beach scene and a clifftop scene. And so when I was thinking about what I would want to go through as an example, I was like, oh yeah, a beach is kind of cool because you can have the shore sound and you can have some land sounds and maybe some birds and a few bits and pieces, and like waves have really distinctive and rhythmic senses to them. So it's kind of like an inherently interesting location. And so I did a quick sketch. It's really rough and bad. but we have location 1 and location 2. So 1 is up on top of the cliff, and 2 is down on the bottom of the beach there, like right up close to the water. And I came up with this idea of like maybe there are like big rocks on the sea and there's water splashing against them. So yeah, that's kind of, I like this idea of like sketching out what a scene might be and then thinking about where things might exist in relationship to each other in the scene. So once I get the sketch, I can start to think about what objects might exist in the scene, and so you're going from the sketch again. We've got the sunset itself, maybe a tiny crescent moon, a cliff, a path leading back up to the top of the cliff. It's not visible in the sketch, obviously, but we need something to the south behind us. So I thought, oh yeah, we'll chuck a lighthouse down there. And we need to put some rocks out in the ocean. And then as far as sounds go, we've got birds, we've got splashes, waves, maybe the wind in the trees up on the cliff. And then it looks really awful, but it's not a bad idea to do, is to just do a quick scribble of what the location, of what the objects, where they might be placed and what directions they might be facing. So in the very center we have this dot. This is kind of like the avalanche diagram that I had earlier, but very poorly drawn. So the circle represents the ground. This is going to be the cliff edge that we're standing on, and I want to have the beach visible below. I have the moon out there, the sunset in the west, a tree. I had a forest written there, but changed it to just a single tree, and the rocks and path and the lighthouse off in the distance, and then same thing again for the actual beach scene. And they are mostly the same objects that I'm using, but I've repositioned them so that when you're up on the cliff, everything is low and you look down onto it, but when you're on the beach, everything is like right at your horizon level. So now I'm gonna switch over and show what this looks like when it's in the game. Maybe. How loud is that? It's pretty quiet. Let's turn that up. That's about as loud as it gets. Alright. So if we look around, I'm gonna kind of hide the color averaging. We've got the beach. Oh, the colors are all backwards. Let's fix that. Dear OBS, do not crash. There we go. That's better. Okay, so yeah, we got the beach at our feet, which is this big kind of circle that we've created. We got some rocks sitting out here on the ocean. We got the dark sky above us. Now I said the moon is a crescent, but we still want to have like a reasonably large area that the player can move across to discover it. It's kind of small compared to say the rocks or the sun here. But it's still much larger than the description insinuates, and sometimes you got to do that. Discoverability is more important than like geometric accuracy. We get the sun there, we get the cliff, and the cliff is kind of light as though it's being lit by the sun, and then on the shadowy side of the cliff is a path leading up. There's a lighthouse over there in the distance. I hope that the audio for this is coming through okay. I might actually mute myself and we can have a bit more of a listen to it. So if we go upwards, up onto the cliff, we've got a bit more, like the lower frequencies of the waves crashing are more present. The gulls are a lot closer. We've got some insect sounds in there as well. But as I said, like the sun is now down below us, the rocks are down below us, the beach is down there as well. And the cliff that we stand on The lighthouse is still kind of in the same spot, imagining that it's like really far away from us. And there's a path leading back downwards, so we'll hide this stuff again. You can have a look around. Kind of like the idea that the moon is hard to spot. It's a difficult game to watch someone play, because it is much more down to, like, it feels more intuitive when it's responding to your own movements. So that's the scene, and to show what this kind of in-engine editing things look like, there's no like visual UI for it. But if I press Control E and G for grab, then I can use the cursor keys to like just move things around. And they're constrained to the X and Y axes, like they're not related to the camera orientation, so when you're sitting off in a diagonal it does get a bit confusing. If I switch to rotation mode, we can rotate it back and forth. And these were like the tiny adjustments that I found myself doing in the demo content. When I was writing things out, I put all the objects in with where I expected them to be needed, and then I would find that I'd need to like rotate them a little bit clockwise, or shift them a little bit left, or move them up or down or something. And so being able to put that into the engine where I can see it happening in real time before choosing whether or not I want to save it, felt like it was like a really valuable thing to do. Even though I can, on the fly, I can just press Control R and it'll reload the scene from the files, so it's not like a really time-consuming task to reload things. I'll just turn that back down a bit. Oh. Yeah, so that's this scene, or this pair of scenes. I might just jump back down so we can have another listen to the soundscape from below and the difference between what it sounds like up here and down there. Or not. Yeah, there's some bug that I haven't identified which prevents me from Oh, it's not a bug at all. I was still in editing mode. That's why I couldn't click on the couldn't click on the path. Ah dear. Need to get a visual indicator in there. Where are those rocks? There they are. There should be like a harsher sound for the waves on the rocks there. Ah, there it is. Yeah, all the sound stuff and all the descriptions and locations and stuff, this is all really rough. I did this in an hour and a half last night, just so I could like kind of talk through the process of doing this. But yeah, so that's this. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to show while we're in here. We'll say not. So let's hide that again. And go back to our slideshow. So looking ahead, moving forward with the development, I'm hoping to roll out a new update for the demo within the next... I did want to have it out this month, but I think we're probably going to be in the first or second week of February by the time it gets out. I've got a couple of issues with VR support on Windows, which I would like to resolve before rolling out a build. Linux and Mac is what I use, so it doesn't bother me so much, but it feels important to maintain platform parity to make sure that every operating system has the same level of support. I'd like to focus on getting gamepad support implemented. I think that's been outstanding for too long. I need to rework the menuing system. Everything that's in there at the moment is super temporary. And adding in a proper menu system will allow me to do things like an options menu and all that sort of good stuff, where players can configure their mouse sensitivity or invert the mouse if they want, or select a specific resolution or any of that sort of stuff. I'm in the process of setting up a build server, which is going to be helpful for deploying 32-bit builds and stuff. As part of the MissJam work that I did, I updated a bunch of my build scripts so that I can now, using the same makefile, generate binaries for different projects by specifying a different game data path, and it'll automatically pick an icon. If an icon exists, it'll automatically put it in a special folder and make sure that the binary has the right name and all that sort of stuff. Whereas previously I was doing like manual renaming and stuff, and it's kind of easy for things to slip through the gaps when you're doing that. So the process of exporting builds and stuff is a lot more streamlined now, which is really cool. And I'm going to continue roughing out the rest of the game's content. In fact, that's going to kind of be a primary focus. Alongside these kind of like your bug fixes and getting the demo updated, is going to be like getting the game playable from beginning to end. So that is about all that I had for the main content for the dev stream. I was also thinking about maybe giving a look at a bit of a preview of what the VR stuff looks like at the moment, because I happen to have one of these sitting right here with me. So we might do that. And if anybody's got any questions, ask them in chat, and I will answer them as soon as I can. But in the meantime, check this out. So we've got stereoscopic rendering is already in, and head-mounted or head tracking is also in. So yep. Oh, helps if I actually turn it on. Hey. It's not a lot of fun when you can't see anything. And I haven't got it set up. I'm very organized today. There we go. Sweet. Yeah, so this is using the DK1 here, which I'm not actually going to officially support. Oh, it's not doing word wrapping properly. That's unhelpful. The actual build that I've got for Winter's Wake does. So ignore that for now. But yeah, so you can look around. It's 1-to-1 mapped. So it kind of feels natural to look at things. You know what you're looking at. You know where it is. It's a really neat experience. Yeah, the DK1 is a little bit too low res. Some of the text gets very difficult to read. But the DK2's high enough res and should look good. But yeah, so that's the state of that stuff. Oh, and it also looks a lot better if I, actually tell it to show the game as it's meant to be shown. But yeah, so that's a bit of a preview of that stuff. Oh, there we go. That's better. Yeah, I guess the font stuff hadn't reloaded because I turned the HMD rendering on in the menu, so there's a small bug I need to fix up. So we can now see the path leading upwards. That mouse cursor around there. And also the head movement is additive to any mouse controls, so I can like move the mouse without moving my head. If I need to like recenter or anything, I can use the mouse to offset that. I'm gonna have like maybe the spacebar or something allow me to like move the head-mounted display around without that actually updating the rotation. But yeah, so if anybody had any questions, ask them now. Otherwise, I will wrap up the stream there and call it a day. Press the right buttons. put a bit more of the Winter's Wake music on. There wasn't a lot of kind of Winter's Wake specific content here. We didn't really touch specifically on much Winter's Wake stuff. So I hope that anybody who was hanging out for those sweet, sweet spoilers wasn't too disappointed. But yeah. I'll have that. Probably should have planned some kind of end of stream wrap up content, but yeah, I'm gonna have a few resources available to my Patreon supporters. That beach example game thing will be uploaded probably later today, and obviously the copy of the slideshow and a few other bits and pieces. But yeah, so since it doesn't look like there are any game-related questions, I'm going to wrap up the stream here. Thank you very much to everybody for watching. Stay cool, be awesome, and see you next time.